Welcome to Morning Joy's weekly news roundup. I'm your host, Keith Downey, and we're about to unpack some of the week's hottest headlines through our Catholic lens. Today, we're diving into hot topics that'll got a lot of folks talking. Massive changes at the Department of Education. What are Christians dealing with in Syria? And a proposal that gets rid of income tax for those who earn less than $150,000 a year. A lot to talk about. And we're actually going to be joined here by news contributor Matt Maloney, and of course also producer of The Quest, A Pilgrimage of Faith. Good morning, Matt.
Hello and good morning. How are you?
Doing well. Thank you so much for joining us. Now, I do want to start off with talking about something that really isn't covered for some reason in mainstream media. It seems to be more gaining traction on social media and a few outlier news sources. But just to give everybody kind of an idea of what's going on, just a few months ago, really in December of 2024, the long-standing regime of Bashar al-Assad fell after 50 years of authoritarian rule. Now, at face value, that might sound like, well, that's good news. But for Syria's Christian community, it's part of a 2,000-year-old heritage in the region. It's turned into a complete nightmare. And I've only seen a lot of most of this information coming from resources on X or social media, where they're basically risking their lives by, publicly sharing this information. But Matt, you've been covering a lot on this over the course of the past week. Maybe tell us a little bit more and why you think the mainstream media hasn't been really covering this.
Yeah, it's interesting. I've been covering it because it's so important for the Christians who are there, and that their stories are just kind of lost. And like you said, you can go on X and there's, pleas of people who, they kind of look all beat up and dirty and, just asking for prayers, asking for someone to help them. They're basically just crying out to the world for assistance. And like you said, the mainstream media has covered it a little bit, but for for the large numbers of people who have died, it's really not getting any justice in any of the news coverage outlets. So we try to mention it here and give you updates when we can, but there's very little information,
Yeah.
And like you said, Bashar al-Assad was an authoritarian. His father was also an authoritarian, but he did protect religious minorities. So you have the Syrian Christians who like you said, have been there for 2,000 years. Mm-hmm. They have the Alawite community who's also being killed and oppressed. They're sort of an offshoot of Shia Islam. And then they have what they're calling Sunni heretics as well, who they're also going after. So it's like, unless you're part of the new regime, and the new regime is not an elected regime, it is something that's just sort of filled the vacuum since Assad was removed from power. And they're now forcing Islam to be the official religion of the state. Not that it wasn't before, but in a way that Sharia law is probably going to play a much more significant role here. And they're looking to do a transitional government over the next 5 years. So there's no immediate hope for a resolution to this. And one of the sad things is the European Union has really... So his name slips my mind, but the guy who is, I think it's Ahmad al-Sharar, he's sort of like the new interim temporary president. The EU has already invited him to come and speak at some cultural thing, and he's sort of put out words saying, we're going to lip service, really, that we're going to investigate some of the killings, and we're going to, stop religious minorities from being oppressed. But there's no actual knowledge. There's no actual evidence that he's doing any of that. the European Union essentially was like, okay, great. So do you want to come talk at our thing? I think it's in a couple weeks. So it's a little bit of a mess.
Yes, a complex mess, that's to say the least. One thing that I thought was really interesting, Steve Ray, who's, if you watch Morning Joy, he's also on giving us virtual pilgrimages, but he essentially called it out back in December when this all happened, and he has a whole article, his analysis on it. We have it in the show notes, or we will have it in the show notes for you to read. Yeah, it's a very interesting topic. We'll make sure to keep everybody up to date when we hear it. But the next big kind of piece of news is the shutdown of the Department of Education. Now, we all know that President Trump's been vocal about wanting to shut it down completely, calling it a big con job, and saying education should be handled by the states. And of course, Doge has taken that ball and run with it. So here's kind of what just happened this week to kind of start off here. On Tuesday, March 11th, the Department of Education fired like around 1,300 employees, which is nearly half its workforce. That dropped them about 4,100 people when President Trump took office to now just around 2,100. They've already let go 60 probationary workers in February, and there's been a lot of movement happening. And really, this is kind of the final mission to streamline things before, closing the doors for good. Matt, in regards to this story, do you think we are going to see, within kind of on a state by state basis, any changes visibly, or is this just kind of the federal aspect?
No, I think that for a period of time, we will see changes on a local levels because local, state departments of education are extremely dependent on federal funding. Mm-hmm. So their whole infrastructure has been based around federal funding. And one of the things that they need to do on a local state level is they need to reduce the administrative class in education. So over the last, I'm not sure how many years, definitely since the 90s, I think, roles of administration in government, in education has risen, I think about 46%. So you're looking at, everyone's assuming that all this money is going to teachers or to support students, and it's really not. So it's just about really getting their books in order on a local state level. And you're asking me to be a contributor, not a reporter at this point in the morning. So I'm actually in favor of eliminating the Department of Education. I have been for a long time because if you look at education results, if you look at successful testing, the kids are doing much worse than they ever were. And the more money we throw at it, it never improves. I'm a big localism guy. I think that's a Catholic belief. You take care of your family first, then your neighbor, then your town, then your county, then your state. Finally, you get to the federal government. So we all have to sort of get our house in order and more of a family, town, and then state level before we try to micromanage things from a federal government. Sure, there could be a small department that has, 15 employees that just has recommendations and best practices and that sort of thing. But this whole top-down approach to education, where kids learn very, very differently. There is no one-size-fits-all style of education. I think in the end, we'll actually have positive results. But you're going to see chaos for a period of time. You're going to see protesting. You're going to hear the narrative that, the most vulnerable children are getting left behind. And some Republicans have come out and said that any funding or support for vulnerable kids in education can be shifted to Health and Human Services. So I don't think you're going to see a total abandonment of the federal government involved. It's just going to not be the same sort of education bureaucracy that we've seen for so many years. And Linda McMahon, the person who's heading all this, her and Trump have basically said, we're here to make not a future role for me, right? You know,
Right.
I'm here to basically shut it down and be the last person and close the doors. So we'll have to see how that plays out.
Definitely. And I think there's a lot of people out there and might have popped in their head, like, does this affect Catholic schools? I had to look into it, and really the short answer is not directly. So Catholic schools, private schools in general, don't rely on the Department of Education the way public schools do, like you were saying, Matt. The Department of Education sends billions to public schools. And I'm not going to touch on a lot of this because you already did, but Catholic schools might get some indirect benefits like tax credits or small grants, but their funding mostly, and we all know this, comes from tuition, donations, and the church, not Uncle Sam. So I wanted to give that a quick shout out now, only because we have just 50 seconds or so. I did want to talk about that new proposal about, you know, if those that are making under $150,000 a year, you would pay zero federal income tax. But we're going to save that. We're going to hold on to that for our after show clubhouse. So for those listening on the radio right now, you won't hear it unless you go on social media, and it could literally be YouTube or Rumble, where you don't have to have like a login or anything like that. And you can join the conversation. You can watch us. Just search Morning Joy Radio or GRN Online, as that is who produces this production. But thanks again, Matt, for joining us. It's been a pleasure. For those listening out there, make sure to tune in this afternoon at 4 p.m. Central, 5 p.m. Eastern for The Quest, a pilgrimage of faith. As I mentioned before, Matt Maloney produces the incredible show, and he's going to be joined by Monsignor Charles Pope to help us prepare for Sunday's readings and so much more. So that's 4 p.m. Central, 5 p.m. Eastern. And that is it for Morning Joy, where truth matters. As I mentioned before, if you're on the radio and you're not going to be listening to the Holy Mass coming up next, please join us for even more conversation and debriefing of today's show in a more relaxed environment. No time constraints whatsoever. Julie Kirk's going to be joining us as well. So you know it's going to be a great time. And of course, you are going to be there too, which makes it even better. But if you are unable, hey, make sure to make this weekend a joyful weekend, and we'll see you bright and early, 6 a.m. Central, 7 a.m. Eastern, Monday morning, bright and early and bushy-tailed. But until then, we'll see ya.
This has been Morning Joy, where truth matters, hosted by Keith Downey. Take some joy with you today. Visit grnonline.com/joy to listen again, share a segment, or answer the question of the day. That's grnonline.com/joy.